You know, I've actually been told that an artist can't replicate the style of another artist, and it's not true. In fact, since I've had to work for brands in studios for 10 years, I've had to consistently match the current style of their brand and even create new characters within that brand. And I'm going to teach you the keys to doing that yourself right now. Really excited that I got permission to do this video to match the style of the Little Prince, or Le Petit Prince, which is a story that I loved when I was a child, and we're gonna break down their style, and I'm gonna create my own character within their world and show you how I do it. Thanks to XFan, who gifted me this Artist 12 Generation 2 pen display, which I'll be using to draw on today. But don't worry, if you don't have digital tools, you can still follow along with a pen or pencil, especially because the Little Prince style is kind of hand-drawn. However, I do recommend that if you want to one day work professionally, that you do graduate up to learning Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator, as most brands use this, and you'll want to be able to match their tools once you get to that stage of your career. Okay, so first we need to know what the elements of style are. And to do that, I'm going to be showing you some of my own personal illustrations. You can see how I varied my style between these images. So to start off, we're going to look at line. So that could be on the outside, and in this style, there's not. In this style, they are, but they're colored. This style, they are, but they're all the same color. So that's part of it, but it's also the quality of the line. So if you notice, these lines are really sketchy. Lines over here are very controlled and clean. I look at both, are there lines being used, what color are they, and how perfect are they? So we're going to look at shape. So a lot of people think about shape as in like squares and triangles and circles, but that always confused me personally. So think about shape as round, pointy, or I don't know, sturdy. Most styles have a mix of these. So for example, I pulled this illustration out, even though this was done a while ago for me, because it's very clean and pointy and feels more sturdy. It's not very pointy. There are some points, but mostly it feels like clean and sturdy. I would call this sort of a graphic style. Even this, which is very circular, is like he's like in like a box shape. And then we have what is more of the style that I tend to work in here, which is there's a lot more round shapes, the rounded edges. There's a couple points here and there, but generally the shapes are rounded. And for the bunny, I left him really round shapes. But for the alligator, I went in and made him a little bit like more long and pointy, like he has a long pointy snout. But I didn't want him to be scary, still left his fangs round. If I had done this, that would have been scarier, but instead they're kind of rounded shapes. Next, we're gonna look at texture. So hopefully you can see the texture in here. It's almost grainy, and there's even like a leaf texture back here. And the way that I painted it is kind of like rough. Even the drawing and sketch marks kind of become part of this texture. It's painterly, there's grain in there compared to this texture, which is mostly very flat, with just a bit of texture on the edge. Then I look at how realistic or stylized it is. So these are, fairly cartoony looking illustration, and this one's much more realistic. This character would look funny standing next to that character in the same world. So you want to make sure that they match the same level of realism. And next we have color. And so this one is a little bit muted compared to most of my work, and especially compared to, if you compare this illustration here, which is like rainbow, to this one, this feels very muted and more dark. Yeah, how muted and bright the colors are, or is it mostly warm colors? Is it mostly cool colors? And things like that. And finally, there's theme. For example, in my own portfolio, I have noticed that I tend to have a theme of like magic or fantasy, but even so the Secret Garden could have been more realistic, more like natural colors, but I made them super bright pinks and greens to feel a little bit more magical than real life. That's a theme that I see in my own illustrations. First step is to gather a lot of sample images, and I'm going to use these so that I can get an idea of how our characters look from the front, from the back, and the side, and different expressions if I can. And I'm going to start compiling my thoughts on what defines this particular style. First thing that pops out to me is the style of the eyes, because they're more like a circle and they aren't filled in, which is pretty unique to show just the circle and not any of the pupils. And the nose is also a pretty simple little line. And looking at line is a really important part, and you'll notice that these lines are black and squiggly, and they tend to be a little bit imperfect. I'm gonna take a look at the color, and I'd say that overall the color palette is very warm and a little bit bright. And there's only really blue as used for like accent behind the characters, so they'll pop out. But generally, like a really warm, friendly palette is what we're gonna go for. And then I like to think about how realistic this drawing style is. So these are pretty cartoony, and it's drawn as though the character, the narrator, drew it. So it doesn't need to look super polished. There are imperfections, and that's totally allowed in this style. One of the other things I like to look at is shapes. So are they really round or pointy? And I'd say a lot of the style has more angular shapes rather than perfectly round shapes. So I'd go for more angular shapes, sort of like this, like sort of pokey with a bit of softness added in. And then I just kind of like to look for themes overall. And one of the themes I've noticed is wind. You'll notice the jacket here, and even the fox's tail, and of course the really iconic scarf as well. And so I might be thinking about wind while I do my drawing. Wanted to draw a character that isn't already drawn, and I realized that would leave our narrator. So he's supposed to be a pilot, so I'm going to include his glasses and helmet. I'll keep his clothing kind of simple with boots, and I'm debating whether I want him to have a coat or just have it off with the sleeves rolled up, because he is in a desert and he probably got hot. Now that I have my rough sketches, I'm going to pick the one I like the most and clean that up. I'll make the drawing bigger and fade it back, then draw over that rough sketch. What I'm trying to think about here is the precise placement of the features and sizes, but not getting too locked in. That way I don't tighten up too quickly and lose all that life and energy too quick. And then I'll go over that and then do a really nice, clean, thinking about the line quality, how thick and thin it is, and the exact placement. But I haven't done that until I have almost like a cleaner rough to work off of. One of the things I noticed in the style while I'm doing this is that their line is almost inky, where there's spots where it gets kind of thick and blobby and then thin again. So I'm definitely thinking about that as I'm doing these really, really clean lines. This is actually one of the reasons why I've said in the past that I cannot use a drawing tablet that does not have pressure sensitivity, because the way that I'm getting this inky look is by drawing a little bit harder and a little bit lighter, so that it's very thin and then it gets thick and blobby. And I wouldn't be able to do that without the pressure sensitivity. And I've never used this tablet before, like I mentioned earlier, but it was really smooth. I didn't have any lag. And trust me, I have experienced lab on these kind of tablets before, not this brand, but it would have gotten thrown out the window. I cannot stand it. I'm very, very picky. So overall, it was a really great drawing experience. And finally, we're at my favorite part, which is coloring, because it's just like color book time. So I'm going to start off by taking colors that I already see in their palette and applying that to my character and seeing if I can get them to work or not. If I need to, I can lighten the color a little bit by adding white to it, so it still feels like it's its family, but it's like a little bit like I need to think about the balance of dark colors and light colors for value contrast. So sometimes I'll do that to make it work. And then since I picked one, this is really roughly colored, I'm going to do another version next to it and play with the colors and see, do I prefer, the green or red scarf, or lighter pants or darker pants? And I'll just go through this sort of process and just color pick and use the paint bucket to fill it in while I decide which ones I like the best. And then once I decided on my colors, I'm going to do a clean color pass and fill it in a little bit more nicely. And the colors that I chose, I went with warm colors because, as I mentioned earlier, the theme of Little Prince had a lot of very warm colors. And originally I chose more of a muted scarf. I went for more of a green, but I realized that when he was all browns and sort of darker colors, it wasn't as vibrant as the rest of the illustrations of the Little Prince. So I went for more of orange on his suspenders and a red scarf. And I almost went for orange shoes, but I realized the fox in the book is also orange, and the fox wouldn't be able to like rub up against his feet if they were the same color. It would blend in, so I ended up going for those darker brown. And we're done! That's how I would go about creating a character in the Little Prince style. If you have any questions, leave them down below. I'll make sure to mark down any of the tools I used today in the little caption thing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Happy creating!